I think we'll go ahead and get started. Now that now that you're here,
Oh, thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah, that's right.
It's good to see you.
Thank you. It's
I
good to
was
see you.
sick last week, so I missed you. And you know what? I tried to get you on Zoom, and you weren't there. Where I mean,
I don't know what you. I mean, I just work here.
yeah, I know, but I thought you were being
Recorded?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are recording it. Yeah.
Well, maybe they're recording it, but it wasn't on.
It wasn't live streamed?
No.
Well,
I
we can tell her.
You tried, we couldn't get on.
I think you should file the complaint. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So we're talking a little bit about the welcoming of the stranger. And as you probably heard this morning from both the text, the Old Testament text from Kings, and of course the gospel text from Luke, and the healing of the 10 quote lepers, and one returning. And we talked a little bit about this, I think, a few weeks ago, with the idea that, it is not an accident that Jesus chooses repeatedly the Samaritan as the one to make a point, whether it's the woman at the well, whether it's the one who returns, or, as was the case with, quote unquote, the Good Samaritan, who, of course, stopped to heal the person. And we started last time a little bit also talking about this. But it is, you know what's going on in the world. I don't have to sort of tell you this. And you know what's, you see, you hear and see the news, and you know what's happening with Israel and with Gaza. And of course, I hope I'm wrong, because of course, as you well know, I've been wrong so often that I've lost track of it. And I may be this time again, but I have a sense that this is not going to be an easy journey towards the fulfillment of a lasting peace. These things are deeply entrenched. But what struck me, both with the language and as a reminder about some things we talked about just a couple weeks ago right here, and that is, what does it mean to come home again? And that's the language that is being used. Now, I want to sort of place this in the larger context, if you will. Imagine Israel being in exile in Babylon. And we are told, based on the text, that of course, as they were heading into exile, the temple is destroyed. What was the first temple, right, is destroyed. We don't have any sort of structural evidence of anything, any remnant that has remained, but we know it was destroyed. The homes were destroyed. The land was really sort of destroyed in many respects. And yet when the exile finished, not everyone came back, but many came back. And they came back, they came home again. But home to what? So you might have seen these pictures of the tens of thousands of Palestinians returning to Gaza. To what? To what? It's gone. Except it is home. And we are reminded that home is not returning to physical houses, for example, but it's returning to a place of belonging, as crazy as that sounds. It's returning to a place of where you have a relationship. And we don't know how that's going to play out. But again, as I hear about this, and none of us in this room is old enough to be cynical, and I hope you don't ever get old enough to be cynical. And so refrain from that for a bit and hope that, in fact, that this will lead to a lasting peace. So as we've been thinking about welcoming the stranger, I have a variety of texts, and I will go through these very quickly here. And here's the reason. I can go back, if I can get this working. Here we go. I can go back and you can look at this and you can see in Exodus, it's very straightforward, right? And let's just refrain from the kind of politicized language that, sort of seeps into our consciousness that you are an alien. And that has an overtone to it, doesn't it? Very different from someone who says, I'm here as a stranger into your midst, as a refugee. It has an entirely different overtone. And as I said last time, the language in the text, we can play with it until the cows come home, but the language in the text really means stranger or sojourner. I know that's not part of our it's not part of our lexicon today, for sure, but that's what the word means. And that's the only way it makes sense when it's repeated by saying, remember, remember. In other words, do not dwell on something as if this is the first time it is happening and it's never happened to us before. Remember that once upon a time you were strangers in a foreign land. And by the way, remember how difficult it was. Remember the challenges. But also remember that at some level you were welcomed, okay? And we have these stories. It's not up here, but we have these stories. Certainly Moses, right? But who else? Right in Genesis, remember Joseph, right? Who would ultimately rise to what today we might call the prime minister. Or perhaps in our governmental structure, we might call him the Secretary of Agriculture, kind of thing, right? So he rose up, remember, and his brothers would come to him later on. So we have this again and again and again. So I put this up here, but then it's repeated in Leviticus. When a sojourner resides with you in your land, you shall not, I don't know how else to express it. Do not beat up on the outsider. Don't oppress the stranger. Who resides with you shall be to you as a citizen among you. You shall love the stranger as yourself. By the way, the bar is high here. I will grant you that. But the only way this works is that you have to love yourself, not like Narcissus here. We know a couple of those people, right? But love yourself for who you are, not in comparison necessarily. The gift of who you are, each of us, being created in the image of God comes into being with who we are. That's just the reality. And I know sometimes we want to compare if only like, but this is who we are. And for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And again, it goes on, and then it gets to Deuteronomy, and it's repeating the same thing. And Deuteronomy, as we talked about last time, literally means, of course, the word literally means from Latin, second law, right? So it's really repeating in a different kind of a way what we read in Exodus. And these are here to remind us. I just find this to be so profound. In the event that we are inclined to cast away people, please remember that once upon a time, we too were strangers in a foreign land. It's profound. And each of us in our own way, whether we have entered into a community that we never were part of to begin with, and what that feels like if you were not welcomed, or welcome into a country where, because of a famine in your own place of birth, and you come. And we know that. We know that. I was thinking a great deal in the last week to 10 days about the Irish famine, for example, that decimated what? Is it about a quarter of the population? So you come for a variety of reasons. And then it's picked up in the prophetic works, it's picked up in the Psalms. The Lord watches over, and I have in parentheses the same word to remind us, right? It's the same word, ger, again and again and again, right? It's the same word. The Lord watches over the stranger. It happens to be gerim in the first, the plural. Upholds the orphan and the widow. We will look at this in a second. Warns against oppressing the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. Do not oppress the widow, the orphan, and the stranger or the poor. And why do we have these groups? You notice all of these. What is frankly fantastic about all these texts, and certainly the prophetic texts, what is incredible about them? Look at the grouping. It's the widow, it's the orphan, it's the stranger, and it's the poor. What do they have in common? They are all folks, groups of people who are on the edge or outside the edge of society, right? And you notice they are grouped together. So the poor, which we have in this country, by any measure, right, might have been citizens who have ancestors that go back 200 years. But they're poor, and they have been put on the edge of society. And the widow, which we will look at because we'll start Ruth in a second, the widow in ancient Israel, right? Let me broaden it. The woman in ancient Israel is defined by whom?
Men.
The men. And to be much more specific, father, husband, son, right? By the way, and if you're a widow, you are, at some level, we will see this, right? Pushed to the side in many respects. Now, that might sound as if that's some kind of quaint, ancient idea, but this is the text that we have. And we don't want to collapse it by saying, well, thank goodness I'm not a widow, therefore it doesn't apply to me. That misses the point, of course. Or thank goodness I'm not poor because I can, survive. That misses the point. Or thank goodness I'm not an orphan. But what they all have in common is the idea that they are on the edge of society. And the stranger is in that group. So what is fascinating here is that this is not only dealing, quote, with the outsider, literally from outside of the country who comes in, but insiders who are functioning on the edge. And we don't have to look around, we don't have to look afar. About 160 years or so ago, Henry David Thoreau, you remember Henry David Thoreau, of course? By the way, I could redact a few things from his famous essay on, it's interesting, it's called On Civil Disobedience. Funny thing, 160 years ago. I can redact a few things and give it to you and you say, oh wow, who just wrote this, right? It is absolutely, the currency is remarkable. And one of the things that he says in there, right? By the way, remember he talks about it. He ends up being imprisoned for what reason?
Not paying tax.
What kind of tax? A very specific tax. Poll tax for voting. And he says no, right? It's one of the things about being an American. But he also says, do not look too far off foes. It's a striking, I found it. In other words, we have, not you in this room because we are enlightened, but others, say, don't look at far off foes and point the finger, those folks over there. Look at ourselves, he says. Henry David Thoreau says it's easy to look at people who are far off as, those people. Look at ourselves. And this is a text that I'm saying to look at ourselves. So last week, I don't remember, I think it might have been Friday or a week ago, Saturday, we were sitting in the study at home, and I received this email from two scholars, both of whom are in California currently, and it's a long email, but the gist of it is to ask if I would be interested in doing a podcast with them on the issue of prophetic stuff, okay? And they have a podcast that is called scripturalworks.com or something. And if I would do a podcast on the prophets and what essentially what it means for us today. So, I'm still contemplating that. The reason I mention that is that the idea is alive and well. What does Scripture have to do with us today? We can listen to both texts this morning read from Kings and from Luke. And by the way, we don't have to go home and say, I need to ponder this to see the connection. As you listen to the words, you should be able to say, holy cow. I'm using religious from words from a different religion here, but and say, yes, it does absolutely have to do with us. So this idea goes into the prophets, okay? But then you also see it picked up in the gospel, right? So we do not have the freedom, nor should we, because I hear this repeatedly, well, that's a different time. Or that's from the Old Testament, or it refers to, well, you can't have it both ways. And I will tell you, and so forgive me if I don't mean to offend anyone, but I will tell you, this is one of the things that when I see the Gideons handing out Bibles, right, it's not really the Bible. Okay? What do they hand out? It's the New Testament plus the Psalms. And the New Testament only has its context in the Old Testament. By the way, I don't know how else to put it. Okay, so the issue that I have is that we have a point of continuity here, and this is based on the scriptures of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Jesus says, I'm hungry, you gave me food, I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink, I was a stranger. And that's the Greek that is used, xenos. Of course, we get our word xenophobia, and that's what we talk about quite often, particularly in this environment. And you welcomed me. You welcomed me. By the way, you didn't put sort of a plate of food, 100 feet from where you are, so that no one could identify your identity. You welcomed me. It's like the Father to the Son. You welcomed me. It's the same idea. Just as you did to the least of one of these members of my family, you did to me. Do you want to know what it means functionally to connect with God and with Christ? Okay? Then look into the face of each other, including those who, maybe for a variety of reasons, have become anonymous and faceless. So several years ago, okay, actually more than several, many years ago, when I was, I had just taken a one-year position at my alma mater, which is also Alan's alma mater, though he is much more famous there than I am. For reasons that have always eluded me. I'll never understand it. And one of the campus pastors, I brought this idea to him, and I said, I look around and I think we should start a chapter of Habitat for Humanity, which, by the way, moved from point A to point Z, which we did. But in between, one of the striking things as we approached folks who might be able to help, businesses, one of the refrains that I heard is, we really don't have any homeless people in this area. Okay? And what is striking about that, couple of things. One, not true. Okay, there were. But worse is that they had become invisible. It's bad enough to be on the edge if you're a widow, if you're an orphan, if you're an outsider, if you're a stranger, and then to become invisible. And it turns out that there were many. As much, if you want to know what it means, look into the face of each other. Luke. And we know this story, okay? He said to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers. By the way, this is tough. We do this. And I want to be clear. I think we should still do this, but not at the expense of the outsider. And you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. If you have not read or seen the movie Schindler's List, okay, it's a difficult movie to see, okay, but then we will begin to see and understand that there are moments of redemption and change that should never be, we should never allow each other to remain unchanged. There's always the possibility, and looked at what with Oskar Schindler, who would then become one of the righteous ones, as they say, right? And then in Romans, contribute to the needs of the saints, extend hospitality to strangers. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Sometimes, by so doing, you have entertained angels. I mean, again and again and again. In Peter, be hospitable without complaining. Ephesians, so then you're no longer strangers and aliens, but you are citizens. I mean, again and again and again. And I give you all of those. Of course, we could spend a lifetime going through each of those texts, right? But what I wanted to show us that it's far too easy, and we're not doing this, but it's far too easy for some folks to say, well, you know, here's a line in some obscure text that says you should do this, and that's the only place in the Bible that you can find it, but that's the one I'm hanging on to. Here, it's all over the place. If you read the biblical text, and I said to you, you know, what does the Bible have to say about justice and righteousness? And you say to me, you know, I'm not so sure because I never discovered it when I read the Bible. Okay? I think you fell asleep. There is no way to miss it. The word itself shows up 1,000 times. In other words, you can't miss it. Now, what we do with that is a whole different story. Okay? Which brings me to the book of Ruth, which you know. But you know what familiarity does, right?
Contempt.
It breeds contempt.
It sure does.
By the way, if you see her eyes, you know, these are the eyes that tell you it breeds contempt, don't mess with me. The famous saying, and what it does is to say that we know the story so well, right, that we don't have to go and look at it again, right? And so maybe contempt is really a harsh word, but familiarity, in other words, don't take it for granted. Just do not take it for granted. Look at this again, and what does this mean? So I want this word here, because this is a word we'll discover in a moment, right? It's a word that we know. By the way, where's Bethlehem anyway? Where do you find it? The city.
I don't understand the question.
Alan says it's in the Bible. By the way, how can you go wrong with that, right? It's kind of, you can't quite challenge that. But physically, where do you find the city of the town of Bethlehem today?
West Bank.
In the West Bank. In the West Bank, right in the West Bank. It's not in Israel, just so we are clear. The word Bethlehem is made up of two words, one of which is very common, the word Beth, which looks like Beth, right? We know this word because we see it in what other words? Words like, actually, like Bethel, for example. It's the same root, okay? Literally, Bethel means house of God, okay? Lechem, which is less known and less common, but it's one that we see and hear and taste on a daily basis, means bread. Okay? So I want you to keep that in mind. Bethlehem literally means house of bread. That's what it means. Right? So we begin this story with a famine in the house of bread. We begin the story because there's a famine in Bethlehem. But where else, where are you going to find bread? We don't have bread in the house of bread. And sometimes, as was the case with potatoes, when you don't have that which will sustain you to allow you to frankly live, right? Or even survive. By the way, what does the word survive mean? I know we sometimes play with language. What does it mean? Sur literally means under, right? And vive comes from the Latin, then the Romance languages, that means what? To live, right? Surviving, you are barely living from, kind of that, you're not just living, you're surviving. But you need this to survive, and when you don't even have that to survive, as is often the case with refugees, what do you need to do? You need to move. And sometimes that movement is precarious and is difficult, and many who have tried never have survived. So here goes. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. When I was a professor several years ago now, at the university, previous university, I had a student who was about to graduate, and he had taken several courses and was something of an advisee unofficially. And he came, to have a conversation with me, one of many in my office. And we weren't talking about this, but we were talking sort of broadly about the courses. And he said, Dr. Gossai, I need to tell you a story or an incident. He said, when I was in high school, I would often, after high school, go over and see my grandmother, And he said one day, I went to see my grandmother after high school, and I say, Grandma, I'm starving to death. And he said, my grandmother stopped me right there. And she said, you are not starving to death. She said, I grew up in the Depression. I know what starving to death is. So let me tell you now, you are hungry. That's what you are, okay? And it's interesting, so this is not just I am hungry, and therefore let me go and find something to eat. You are, not just as a metaphor, you are literally starving to death. And in those moments, you have to make decisions that are simply life-changing. How is this going to work? And so here we go. So there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem. By the way, look at the way this narrative sort of is expressed. A certain man in Bethlehem in Judah, who went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. Okay, the name of his wife Naomi. The names of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab, and they remained there. Remember now, that's the first 2 verses. Okay, listen to the next 3. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Okay, 1. They took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah. The name of the other was Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion had died, and the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. By the way, that's how this narrative opened, and that's what happens. You talk about a transformation of a life within the first 6 verses of the book. So what is it about Moab? We know they had bread, they had food, but what else? What else do we? Anything that you know about Moab? The people of Israel, broadly speaking, right, northern and southern, the people of Israel were told, explicitly, do not go to Moab. Don't even go through Moab. This is enemy territory. And that is at least one sort of factor that makes this striking. There are moments in our lives when the circumstances are such that we have to take a step into that which is dangerous, difficult, simply so that we might live. And the hope that as we come into that context, because of circumstances beyond our control, that we will welcome the stranger. And I'm telling you what you already know in this time, in this place, in this environment. That is very, very difficult right now. Not because we don't want to welcome the strangers, but because the environment is such that we're being told, by and large, you're not welcome here. And so how do we reconcile this? Where our actions betray our words. Where our words say, we welcome you here. Except, of course, don't come here. But don't get me wrong, I welcome you here. But you're not really welcome here. But I want the record to show that you're welcome here. Where our actions betray our words. And by the way, we don't have to have any sort of grand, sort of story to talk about that. That could happen in everyday, ordinary life, right? If you say something, right, the hope is that you will mean it and that you will act in it. This is not one of these moments where you're on the sidewalk and, and I see Alan and, hey, Alan, we need to do lunch. And before Alan could answer, I'm 10 feet away. I have no interest in doing lunch with Alan. By the way, in general, I really don't want to have lunch with Alan anyway. But sometimes we do that, right? Where it's so much a part of our, everyday kind of parlance that we just kind of continue life. But here, when it's life and death, our actions cannot betray our words. And this is difficult because, we are going upstream here. So they go in Moab. And I know it's difficult sometimes when you're reading a text like this to see the humor here as well. But let me invite you to see the humor here. Here is the deal. If you want a story to be told about a woman, what do you need to do in the first 6 verses?
Kill off the men.
Kill off the men. Absolutely. I see you said this so readily that it worries me a little bit over here. Move over to the next year. That's right. Kill off the men, right? So what do we have? Elimelech is gone, right? They find 2 husbands. They kill off the poor guys. They're gone. Okay. So after the first, we now are going to have a story about 3 widows. And at this point, one of whom is an outsider. But before we lose track of this, Moab welcomes, not only in a kind of a superficial way, here is some food, but gives them life and community. You find spouses here. And it's reminiscent of Jeremiah's letter to the exiles, the famous letter that he sends, painful. He says, you're going into exile here, right? Let me write and tell you how you're going to survive. Don't go there and live out of your suitcase. He doesn't say that literally, right? But don't go there thinking, I'm going to be here for a moment. No, plant what? Plant trees. Find spouses. Have children. In other words, you're going to be there for a while, but find yourself a part of the community. So the men are gone. We have 3 widows. And by any definition, right, it's a problem. So how will these 3 women navigate life to survive, to live? And we have some, in my view, some of the most powerful and poignant moments that one could find in Scripture, some of which we know. And so in reading this now, I hope we will contextualize it. So she started to return. This is Naomi now, right? Remember now, who was in charge when they went to Moab? It was the husband. And we don't want to sort of, play too many games here. But when you read this, you will see that all of the descriptions center around the male. It's Elimelech, it's his sons, it's his wife, it's all his. But then, then she started to return with whom? Her daughters-in-law, right? Is it still his? Sure, yeah, really. But now she started returning with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she now heard that in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. You remember Thomas Wolfe's famous line? You can't go home again. Okay, well, let's see if we can go home again here. Okay, we saw this last few days. People are going home again. Okay, it might not have anything, but I hope that all of us have now, I hope, arrived at a place where we realize home is not the house, or my house, or a building, or a structure, or necessarily even a place. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, and we want to keep track of this. Naomi, the mother-in-law, elderly by any definition, said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with me. Okay. By the way, just for the record, if you look at the text there, it says, as you have what? Okay. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me, right? The husbands. Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. Pause for a second. These are 3 widows, 1 elderly, 2 younger, 2 daughters-in-law, and they are about to say goodbye to each other. In a moment where Naomi has decided that I want to recognize the kindness that you have done to me, but you need to go back. I'm going to go back to Judah. By the way, what will Naomi find there? We will discover that later, what she will find there. But for your sake, stay home here. Go back to your mother's house. And they wept aloud, and they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. By the way, we don't want to read this and just walk away, oh, that's really cute. This is a dramatic, extraordinary moment where these 2 daughters-in-law say, we will go back with you, which for them now will be a foreign land, to a foreign people, to a strange land. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Will you go with me? By the way, and then it gets really kind of interesting. Let's put it that way here. Will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? By the way, so here's this elderly mother-in-law says, would you just go back to your mother? I mean, if you stay with me, do I have sons in my womb to give you husbands? By the way, and you and I are listening to this and you're thinking, huh? Because, of course, the idea was what? About what? I don't have any more sons, right? And there is remember the English is kind of like the phrase that might be used, which will show up later on in the text. But in English, we might call that what? There is a word levere, but levirate marriage. It's your next of kin. And typically your next of kin in this case would be what? Your brother, right? Now, by the way, we don't have that anymore, okay? But for those of you, not us in this room, but any younger people who might be thinking, particularly women, about getting married, choose wisely who your prospective bridegroom's best man is going to be, okay? Think of the word. Best man, in case this doesn't work out. Choose wisely, okay? Levirate marriage. And you remember this, Henry VIII, right? Who is his first wife? Hi, your reaction is like, who cares? But of course, his first wife was Catherine of Aragon, who was his brother's wife. And when his brother died, poor Hank, okay? And you know how well that worked out, right? 6 wives later. Okay, so the Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in your household of your husband. Then she kissed them and they wept aloud. They said, no, we're not going. Naomi said, okay, turn back, my daughters. You see the shift in focus here now? Okay, they're daughters-in-law. Now they have become what? Turn back, my daughters, go your way. Should I have a husband tonight and bear sons? Would you just wait until they were grown? Will you refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me. And then they wept aloud again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. Let's pause for a second. I'm going to ask an entirely unreasonable question. Who made the wise decision here? Orpah. By the way, you know Oprah Winfrey was meant to be Orpah. Did you know this? Okay, they transposed 2 letters in her name. Who made the wise decision? Orpah?
Yeah.
Why?
Because she was in the country that where she understood it was her culture. She had family there. It
Probably
would be a
her
lot
mother.
easier for her.
Okay? Anyone else?
I'd say Ruth, because we know what came out of Ruth later. We know the ending of the story.
Marilee says it's Ruth because she knows how the story ends. And I love it. But let me give you a quick aside here about something that I remember reading a while back when I was doing a piece on this. And there was a rabbinic scholar who wrote, and I mean, my heart burns when I think about this, who wrote about Orpah, that her decision was so terrible that literally the dogs will, and she went on. Which, you know, it's a strange, devastating kind of indictment, right? But one makes a practical decision. But one makes a decision really, you talk about a decision that comes from the heart. I am not going to leave this elderly person by herself, even if it means I have to accompany her into a foreign land. For me, I will not do that. And the language here, which is beautiful, but somewhat, the translation somewhat leads us, you know, because when you think of the word cling, what comes to mind? Hang on to, right? Is it positive or negative? Clinging. I mean, when it says someone is clinging to something, do you think, oh yeah, oh that's beautiful? No, we don't want people clinging, you know. But here, sadly, I think the word misses the point. The word really means to stay close to. That's what it means. I am going to make a decision to stay close to you. Close to you. That word later on is used several times in Ruth, but it doesn't use the word cling. And this is where sometimes English translations, you know, do not capture. It's used several times, but it doesn't use the word cling.
But we don't know why Ruth didn't want to stay in her own land, in her culture, with her own mother.
But we have a sense, right? Because sometimes decisions from the heart are not practical. And this is a decision from the heart. I am not going to leave you by yourself, even though you're going back. In other words, this is what we have. There are some universal themes here, right? About love and kindness, grace and acceptance, sacrifice. Sacrifice. By the way, these are the biggies. This is not about whether we are Americans or, you know, heaven forbid, Canadians, or any other people, or whether we are male or female, or Easterners or Westerners or Southerners. No, there is something universal that holds us together as human beings, such as love and kindness, and sacrifice and acceptance and belonging, and the universal idea of sadness and joy. And Ruth makes this decision, and then we have this beautiful, beautiful piece. So she said, look, this is Naomi. Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return to your sister-in-law. Okay? Notice, at this point, there is no indication that Orpah and Ruth, right, had converted. There is no indication. I mean, think how radical this is. They are accepted into the family as sons-in-law, as daughters-in-law, regardless of what religion and who they worship. It's a remarkable thing. Because sometimes love and acceptance and belonging transcends certain things that we have created to separate. But Ruth said, Do not press me to leave you. And this is one of the times that the King James Version, the translation of the first line there is even more beautiful, which you all know. It begins how? Entreat me. I know we don't use that anymore, right? And that's a shame. Because, none of us goes around at our workplace or, entreat me not. No one says that. What a shame. But it's beautiful. So, entreat me not to leave you, to turn back from following you. And look at Ruth there. Wherever you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do thus to me and more as well, if even death parts me from you. I mean, by the way, if you are looking for one of the most beautiful and dramatic moments of conversion and sacrifice, here it is. I'm going to give up what? My religious beliefs in God. I'm going to give up the place of my birth. I'm going to give up my people. And here is my commitment to you. I will be by your side, even if death parts me from you. And I know we have this, and we have this, entreat me not to leave you has become what? It's known, and you hear it in weddings quite a bit, right? It's called the Song of Ruth, right? It's called the Song of Ruth. And you hear it, and it's lovely, right? But contextually, right, this is what it comes down to. It is an extraordinary and dramatic change, not a rejection. And this is what I want to, by embracing you, by connecting with you, by welcoming you, by ensuring that you're not left to dwell alone. I'm not rejecting what I have, but I'm opening up myself to welcoming you by being with you. It is not so much a rejection as it is, in fact, a welcoming. So here, the three men, right? 3 women, 3 widows, no fathers, no husbands, no sons. By the way, these are, if you're a woman, these are going to be your identity markers. And they're all gone. And so we have this sacrificial love of Naomi, who is willing to say, go back, stay home. This is your place. These are your gods. Go back to your mother's house. You have been very kind to me. But I can't essentially be unkind to you. I can't be selfish. Go back. Stay home. But Ruth clung to her. Imagine giving up one's identity to care for the other and heading into a land of the unknown. And then, let me just say this and then we'll stop. Now Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side. By the way, did we know about that? We have all kinds of new pieces of information along the way here. A prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of corn behind someone in whose sight I might find favor. She said to her, go, my daughter. So she went. She gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the family of Elimelech. He said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to the young man who was in charge of the reapers, look carefully to the question. To whom does this young woman belong? You want to know her identity? Who does she belong to? By the way, we don't do that anymore, right? We don't do that anymore, right? I know you didn't hear me the first two times. So we don't do that anymore, right? Yes, we do. We absolutely do. And how do we see that most prominently displayed? In weddings. Who gives this woman? Who gives this woman? And then, you know, proud dad said, that would be me. Okay. By the way, you notice that doesn't happen. Who gives this man to be the bridegroom here, right? Right? And the proud dad walks over, gives it to the bridegroom who takes, right? We have the remnants of this. We do. I'm not knocking it, but just so that at least we recognize it. And Boaz said to his young men who was in charge of the reapers, to whom the young man who was in charge of the reapers says, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the land of Moab. He said, please let me glean, gather among the sheaves. So she came, and she's been on her feet early morning until now. And Boaz said, now listen, my daughter, do not glean in any other field or leave this one. Keep close to my young women. Two things to note, right? That's all Boaz knows about Ruth the outsider. That's all, right? And he simply says, stay in this field. And then stay close to the young women. And the word that is used there for our record is the same word that is translated earlier as clung. Okay? So if we are looking to see what this is about, it is the same idea. Stay very close. And this is not like within 3 feet, right? It is the idea that ensure that you become next part of this group, part of this person. All right? Now, much will happen here. All right? But as they say in some quarters, it's not a cliffhanger. You know how the story ends, right? But this is where we'll pick it up next time to see what happened with these two strangers in a foreign land. And you will discover, I hope, some things that we had not thought about before. All right. Thanks, everyone.